The galaxy knew of them, the Drathin swarm, a living tide of bioships, fused flesh and metal older than written history. They drifted between the stars in endless waves, a hunger that no one could measure, a plague that no weapon could cure. Entire civilizations had burned in their path. Entire worlds had screamed and then gone silent, stripped clean down to barren rock. They were endless. They were mindless. They could not be reasoned with, bargained with, or tamed. Every star empire feared them. Every colony whispered prayers never to see their black silhouettes blotting out the sun. The swarm had no mercy, no hesitation. They were death itself, moving on wings of bone and fire, and for as long as memory stretched, one fact was certain: nothing in existence could stop them. Until now. It began as a whisper. A rumor passed from one listening post to another, from trader to trader, like a story too wild to be believed. On the far edge of the Orion Arm, deep in unclaimed space, the swarm had stopped, not destroyed, not scattered, just stopped. To some it was a joke, a broken hive perhaps, a freak accident in the swarm's endless cycle of feeding and moving. The great empires laughed at the idea, but then came the message. It spread across neutral channels, reaching every corner of the galaxy. Simple words carried on an open broadcast, impossible to ignore. This is the Terran Union. The swarm is under our command now. For a moment, the stars themselves seemed to fall silent. No one believed it. No one wanted to believe it. Because if the words were true, it meant the impossible had happened. It meant the nightmares that had devoured empires had been leashed. Not by the wise Tarun councils, not by the mighty Korin fleets, not by the ancient machine intelligences of the Rim, by humans, by a young, reckless species who had only recently clawed their way into the galactic stage. A species known more for audacity than caution, for stubbornness rather than wisdom, and yet the evidence could not be denied. The first proof came in fractured holofeeds smuggled out of the Orion Arm. Pirate ships, smugglers, and spies all brought the same story. Air Terran fleet drifting beside the swarm, not firing, not fleeing, but standing still in the same system. And the swarm did not attack. Billions of chitinous wings folded in silence. Spines and mandibles glistened in the void, still and waiting as though listening. The swarm, which had never known obedience, floated in formation like soldiers awaiting orders. The sight was so unnatural, so deeply wrong, that many who watched the recordings felt their blood turn cold. How could the mindless be controlled? How could chaos be leashed? The galaxy had no answers, only fear. Some species laughed still, though their voices trembled. Tricks, they said. Holograms. Clever editing. Humans spreading lies to make themselves appear powerful. But the denials died quickly. Because within weeks, whole sectors of space, once haunted by the swarm's endless hunting, grew quiet. The great feeding tides no longer drifted freely. They moved with purpose now, and their paths aligned with Terran patrols. Reports followed, human convoys passing safely through regions once deemed suicide zones. Outposts that had lived in fear now reported peace. The swarm's hunting grounds had been cut, controlled, redirected. It was no trick. The rumors were true. The swarm was under human command. Panic spread faster than the news itself. In the gilded towers of the Tarun Council, the elder species trembled. For millennia, they had been the self-proclaimed guardians of order. Yet their fleets had failed again and again against the swarm. And now, a younger race, one barely a century beyond their own homeworld, had done what the ancients could not. On the war hives of the Korin, debates raged with fury. Should the humans be crushed now before they grew too bold? Should the swarm itself be destroyed, even if it meant burning half the Orion Arm to cinders? Even the machine intelligences of the Rim, silent and logical, calculated probabilities they had never once considered. Their simulations could not explain humanity's triumph. It defied all mathematics, and beneath all the debates, one question echoed in every mind, in every shadowed corner of every star empire. How? How had humans done it? What madness drove them to even try? No other species had dared to study the swarm. No other empire had wasted lives on impossible experiments. The swarm was death itself. To face it was suicide. To approach it was to invite annihilation. But humanity had always been different. They were not the strongest, not the most advanced, not the wisest. What they had was something else, an audacity that bordered on insanity. When others said it cannot be done, humans asked why not. When others fled from the swarm's shadow, humans leaned closer, searching for patterns no one else had seen, and somehow, impossibly, they had found one. Now the galaxy watched with dread. If humanity could leash the swarm, what else could they control? What other terrors could they bend to their will? And worse still, what if the leash broke? What if the swarm turned again, this time stronger, twisted by human meddling? Would the galaxy face a plague worse than before? Questions multiplied. Fear deepened. Trust vanished. Yet no matter what doubts were whispered, one truth could not be denied. The swarm obeyed humans. And as fleets across the stars watched the black tide of bioships move at Terran command, every admiral, every ruler, every intelligence analyst felt the same chill in their veins. The galaxy had changed forever. And in the silence that followed the Terran broadcast, one final question burned brighter than all the others. Not what had the humans done, not why had they risked it, but something far darker, a question no one dared to speak aloud. If humans had succeeded in controlling the galaxy's most feared monsters, would they ever give them up? Long before the broadcast, before the galaxy trembled at the sight of the swarm standing still beside human ships, there had been only whispers in the halls of Terran science. The idea was madness. To approach the swarm, to study them, was unthinkable. Every record in the galactic archives called them untamable. Countless fleets had tried to destroy them, to trap them, to understand them, and all had been consumed, but humans, in their way, were not like the other species. Where others saw a wall, they saw a door that had not yet been opened. Where others saw certain death, they saw opportunity. And so, in secret, the first experiments began. It was a hidden research station, orbiting a dead moon in a system no star map bothered to mark. To the galaxy, it did not exist. To the Terran Union, it was called Project Silence. A team of scientists, soldiers, and engineers worked behind sealed doors, cut off from their families, sworn to secrecy that would last a lifetime. They were not heroes. They were not fools. They were something more dangerous, curious. At first, their work was simple. They collected every recording of swarm encounters, battle feeds, civilian distress signals, even the last transmissions of dying colonies. They watched them all, frame by frame, pulse by pulse, searching for patterns in what seemed to be pure chaos. Most saw only horror. The swarm struck with no warning, no hesitation, tearing through shields and armor like paper. But the humans noticed something else, something no other species had ever cared to look for. The pauses. For moments, fractions of seconds, the swarm would hesitate. Their movements would falter. Their formations would bend ever so slightly. To most, it was nothing. But to the scientists of Project Silence, it was a language. The lead researcher, Dr. Mira Hallberg, was the first to speak the thought aloud. What if they're not mindless? She whispered to the others in the observation deck. What if we've been too afraid to hear what they're saying? It was a dangerous idea. Madness, some called it. But madness is where humanity had always thrived. They began transmitting signals, simple ones, bursts of electromagnetic noise, pulses of radio waves. At first, nothing happened. The swarm ignored them, continuing their endless cycles of feeding and moving. Then came the first response, a cluster of swarm ships, 20 bioforms gliding through the dark, slowed. Not much, not enough for certainty, but enough for hope. The humans doubled their efforts. They tried new frequencies, rhythmic bursts, even tones woven like music. Most attempts failed. Some ended in disaster. Outlying Terran listening posts were wiped away when the swarm grew agitated. Soldiers died in silence, their sacrifices buried beneath classified files. But slowly, painfully, progress was made. One night, deep in the void, an experiment succeeded. The research station sent a pulse, a low rhythmic beat designed to mimic the swarm's own vibrations. For the first time, the swarm reacted not with violence, but with stillness. The bioships drifted into formation, wings folding inward, as if waiting for something. It lasted only seconds before they scattered again. But those seconds changed everything. The impossible had cracked open. Not everyone celebrated. Within the Terran Union itself, fierce debate erupted. Politicians warned of catastrophe. Military commanders demanded the project be shut down before humanity attracted the swarm's full wrath. But the scientists refused to stop. To them, fear was meaningless. What mattered was truth. What mattered was that for the first time in all of history, something had answered. And so the work continued, always in secret, always at the edge of annihilation. The cost grew higher with every attempt. Entire research teams vanished, their stations consumed when the swarm grew restless. Fleets sent to escort experimental broadcasts were torn apart, their crews lost to the void. Other species watched from afar, scoffing at humanity's recklessness. The galaxy called them reckless. They were not wrong. Every experiment with the swarm carried a price, and the price was almost always blood. The Asterion had proven that the swarm could be guided, if only for a brief time. But the test had also proved something else. The leash was fragile. A moment of hesitation, a fluctuation in the signal, and the swarm reverted to its hunger. Hundreds of Terran crews learned that lesson with their lives. Research stations went dark in the middle of transmissions, swallowed whole. Fleets sent to guard experimental broadcasts were torn apart in seconds. Entire colonies near test sites were ordered into evacuation drills, living under the shadow of annihilation should anything go wrong. And things went wrong often, yet humanity did not stop. To the Terran Union, the swarm was more than a threat. They were the galaxy's oldest nightmare, a curse that no species had lifted in thousands of years. To control them, even for a heartbeat, was to grasp a power so great it could rewrite the balance of the stars, but power demanded sacrifice. The scientists of Project Silence understood this better than anyone. Every breakthrough was stained with names etched into memorial walls. Every successful signal had been paid for in wreckage and ashes. Still, the researchers worked on, obsessed, driven, some would say consumed. Where other species looked upon their deaths as proof of failure, the humans saw them as progress. Each failure meant they were closer to success. Each disaster was another step toward understanding. The galaxy mocked them. The Tarun councils aired public debates laughing at human arrogance. They throw their young into the fire, one elder scoffed, and call it wisdom. The Corrin warlords roared with amusement, declaring humanity suicidal fools who would feed themselves to the swarm until nothing remained. Even the machine intelligences of the Rim, cold and calculating, dismissed the efforts as statistical noise. Their endless simulations showed no path forward. The swarm, they concluded, was chaos embodied. But humans did not think like the other species. Where others demanded certainty, humans gambled with chaos itself, and sometimes against every calculation, they won. One of the greatest breakthroughs came not from the laboratories, but from a battlefield drenched in wreckage. The Terran destroyer Eurydice was caught in the path of a swarm cluster during a routine test. Her signal failed, and the swarm descended like a hurricane. With engines failing and weapons exhausted, the captain did the only thing left. She ordered the communication officer to broadcast a human song. It was an old Earth melody, carried across the void. Trembling and desperate, to the shock of every survivor, the swarm faltered. The bioships slowed, their spines quivering as if listening. For 60 seconds, the nightmare held its breath. Then, just as suddenly, the swarm scattered into the dark, leaving the Eurydice crippled but alive. The song became legend in Project Silence. Not because it was music, but because it proved something the scientists had only guessed at. The swarm was not deaf to pattern. They responded not just to raw signals, but to rhythm, to harmony. And if humans understood anything, it was how to weave chaos into music. But every discovery demanded another sacrifice. The Helios Array, a massive orbital transmitter, was destroyed when the swarm turned on it without warning. Over 2,000 researchers and soldiers died in the flames. Their last transmission was simple: they are listening. In the aftermath, the Terran government nearly shut the project down. Political leaders argued that the cost was too great. Families demanded justice for the lost, but the scientists resisted. They stood in front of tribunals, in front of angry senators and grieving mothers, and said the words that burned in their hearts: "If we stop now, they will never stop." Not until every world is ash. It was a cruel truth, but no one could deny it. The swarm would not simply vanish. Someone had to try, and only humans were willing. In the centuries of galactic history, countless species had faced the swarm. Every one of them had fought, fled, or died. None had thought to speak to them. None but humans, It was not courage that drove them. It was not wisdom. It was curiosity. That relentless, reckless hunger to understand. The same hunger that had driven them to climb out of caves and touch the stars. The same hunger that had driven them across oceans, through wars into the unknown again and again. Curiosity was their gift. Curiosity was their curse, and it was that curse which now carried them deeper into the swarm's song. For the galaxy, it was proof of madness. For humanity, it was destiny. They learned to lace signals with rhythm, to pulse transmissions like a heartbeat. They learned that the swarm would respond to patterns in ways no one had ever dared test. But for every success, another ship was lost. For every breakthrough, another name was carved into the memorial walls of Project Silence. The cost was unbearable, and yet the humans bore it, because they had seen something the rest of the galaxy refused to believe. The swarm was not mindless, and if it was not mindless, then it could be tamed. Other empires began to whisper. Some called the humans insane, others called them dangerous. But a few, just a few, felt a new kind of fear stir in their hearts. Because if humanity truly succeeded, if they truly bent the swarm to their will, then the balance of power would shift forever. And so the experiments continued, paid for in blood and silence. Every time a station went dark, every time a fleet was lost, humanity tightened its grip on the song of the swarm. Until at last, after years of sacrifice, the leash was no longer a theory, it was real. Fragile, dangerous, imperfect, but real, and the galaxy, though it did not yet know, was about to change forever. The day began like every other encounter with the swarm, with dread. A Terran fleet of 8 ships, fragile compared to the vast armadas of the elder empires, waited at the edge of a dead system. Wreckage from a dozen battles drifted across the void, silent memorials to those who had tried and failed before. Every officer on the bridge knew what was coming. A swarm cluster, nearly 200 bioships strong, was approaching on an intercept course. Normally, this would have been suicide, but today was different. Today, the Terrans were not here to fight. They were here to test the leash. On the Vigilant, the fleet's flagship, Captain Elias Rourke stood at the command dais, his jaw set like stone. Around him, the bridge hummed with tension. Technicians whispered final checks. Soldiers clutched their harnesses. Even the hum of the ship's reactors seemed subdued, as though it too feared what was about to happen. Dr. Mira Hallberg, the scientist who had led Project Silence from the beginning, stood beside him. Her hands trembled, not from fear but from anticipation. This was the culmination of years of sacrifice, years of blood, wreckage, and whispered songs in the void. "Signal ready," she said quietly. Rourke's eyes never left the holo display, where the swarm's bioships grew larger with every heartbeat. "Play it." The signal pulsed into the darkness. A rhythmic beat, a low vibration carried on electromagnetic waves, woven with the strange harmonies that only humans had ever dared to test. The swarm responded as expected. With hunger, they surged forward, wings of bone spread wide, mandibles glinting with the light of distant stars. The sight was enough to send shivers through every soul in the fleet. Weapons crews begged for permission to fire. Rourke said nothing. The signal continued, stronger, louder, like a drumbeat rolling across the cosmos. And then, impossibly, the swarm slowed. A hush fell over the bridge. The swarm's advance faltered, their chaotic rush breaking apart. The bioships shuddered, wings folding, movements uncertain. "Steady," Hallberg whispered, as though afraid the silence itself might shatter the moment. The signal shifted again, weaving a new rhythm, a steady pulse like a heartbeat. The humans watched in awe as the swarm clustered together, hundreds of living ships folding into a tight formation. For the first time in all of galactic history, the swarm did not attack, they obeyed. Gasps filled the bridge. Some wept openly, others could only stare, unable to believe what they were seeing. Captain Rourke's voice broke the silence. "Are they holding position?" "They're waiting," Hallberg breathed. "They're waiting for orders." Her hands flew across the console, adjusting the rhythm, testing. Slowly, carefully, she altered the signal to suggest movement. A turn, the swarm turned with it. 200 bioships, each the size of a city, each capable of burning a world to ash, followed the command of a human pulse. The impossible had become real. Across the system, other eyes were watching. The Tarun councils had sent observers expecting to see humanity destroyed. Their cloaked vessels hovered at the system's edge, recording every moment. When the swarm froze and then followed the human fleet, the Tarun elders fell silent. The Korin warlords, watching from hidden war hives, stared in disbelief. For centuries they had poured endless fleets into hopeless battles with the swarm. Now a species barely out of their cradle had bent the monsters to their will. Even the machine intelligences of the Rim, monitoring with cold precision, flagged their simulations with a new category. Unknown variable, human control. The galaxy had witnessed the unthinkable. But inside the Terran fleet, awe soon gave way to fear. The signal worked, but only just. The swarm's obedience was fragile. One fluctuation, one misstep, and the tide could turn. Suddenly the swarm surged forward, closing the gap by 100 kilometers in an instant. Alarms screamed. Soldiers cried out. The fleet braced for impact. News travels faster than light when carried by fear. Within days of the Terran demonstration, the galaxy was ablaze with whispers, rumors, and panic. Everywhere across every star empire, one truth spread. The swarm had obeyed. On the shining world of Triskar, home of the Tarun councils, the elders met in endless debate. These beings had ruled for millennia, their wisdom guiding countless species. They had always spoken with calm certainty, even in times of war. But now their voices shook. The recordings cannot be trusted, one elder declared, her jeweled robes glittering in the council chamber. The Terrans used tricks, illusions, but her words were weak and she knew it. Too many witnesses had seen the swarm halt. Too many ships had confirmed the impossible. Another elder, his crest trembling with fear, spoke more plainly. If the humans truly command the swarm, then every world, every fleet, every empire is at their mercy. The chamber fell silent. For the first time in living memory, the Tarun had no answers. In the war hives of the Korin, fear took a different shape. The Korin were not thinkers. They were warriors. To them, the swarm had always been the perfect enemy, mindless, endless, a foe that could be fought forever without shame of defeat. But now the swarm was no longer the galaxy's enemy. Now they were humanity's weapon. The warlords raged in their chambers, slamming fists against iron walls, shouting over one another. Some demanded immediate war against the Terrans, to burn them before their leash grew stronger. Others argued that such a war would only unleash the swarm in retaliation, and the Korin fleets would be the first to fall. For once, the warriors had no hunger for battle, only dread. Even the cold machine intelligences of the Rim faltered. These beings did not feel fear as organics did, but they understood probability. And their calculations now returned results that had never appeared before. Variable, humanity plus swarm. Result, galactic dominance within 2 centuries. Error margin, negligible. For the first time, the machines marked humanity as an existential threat. And for the first time, they hesitated to act. For the swarm was a force they themselves had never contained. Meanwhile, among the lesser races, panic spread like wildfire. Colonies that had lived in fear of swarm raids now faced a new nightmare, that the swarm would not devour them randomly, but would come on command, unleashed by human will. Traders whispered that humans had grown mad with power. Refugees fled to distant systems, convinced the Terrans would soon march the swarm across the stars. On backwater worlds, preachers screamed that humanity had made a pact with demons, and the end of days was near. Even allies of the Terran Union began to turn away. Treaties wavered, trust dissolved. To stand beside humanity now was to risk the wrath of every empire, the suspicion of every neighbor, and yet for all the fear, no one could act, because no one understood how the humans had done it. Spies were sent. Fleets shadowed Terran ships. Scientists tried desperately to mimic the signals humans had created, but every attempt ended in failure. The swarm ignored them, or worse, attacked with savage ferocity. It was not simply the signal. It was something deeper, something uniquely human. Their rhythm, their music, their strange way of twisting chaos into pattern. No machine, no alien mind could replicate it. The swarm bent only to humans, and that terrified the galaxy more than anything else. In the Terran Union itself, the reactions were mixed. Some celebrated. On Earth, parades were held, banners flew, and speeches thundered with pride. Humanity, the young species once mocked as reckless children, had accomplished the impossible. They had taken the galaxy's nightmare and placed it in chains, but not all Terrans rejoiced. In hidden corners, whispers grew. Soldiers who had seen the swarm up close spoke of a terrible silence in their eyes, a silence that felt like waiting. Scientists warned that the leash was fragile, dangerous, and incomplete, and ordinary citizens asked the question no leader wanted to answer. If we can control the swarm, what will we do with them? The galaxy did not wait for an answer. Conspiracies bloomed, armies mobilized, alliances shifted in the shadows. Some species sought to court humanity, hoping to stand beside their newfound power. Others plotted in secret, searching for ways to destroy the Terran Union before it was too late. But none dared move openly. None dared provoke the swarm, for in every mind, in every council chamber, in every whispered conversation, one image burned. 200 bioships, each a monster capable of burning worlds, following a human fleet like obedient hounds. Captain Elias Rourke, who had commanded the Vigilant during the first test, understood the truth better than most. He had seen the terror in the swarm's stillness. He had felt the leash strain, the fragile thread between obedience and destruction. In his private logs he wrote words that would never be released to the public. The galaxy fears us, but they do not understand that we should fear ourselves even more. The leash holds for now, but what happens when the swarm begins to pull back? Dr. Mira Hallberg, for her part, ignored the politics and fear. To her, the experiment was not about power, not about dominance. It was about knowledge. The swarm was no longer chaos. They were a question, and humanity was the only species willing to find the answer. But even she could not ignore the consequences. The galaxy would never see humans the same way again. No longer reckless children. No longer the upstarts of the Orion Arm. Now they were something else. Something far more dangerous. The species that had dared to leash monsters. And so the galaxy waited in silence. Waited for the humans to make their move. Waited for the swarm to stir again. Waited, with dread, for the day when curiosity and fear would collide. Because one truth was clear: the balance of power had shifted. And whether by intention or by accident, the humans now held the fate of the stars in their hands. For weeks, the galaxy waited for humanity to speak. The swarm had stopped. The empires had fallen silent. And all across the stars, the question echoed like thunder through the void. What will the Terrans do next? It was on the 4th day of the 9th Terran cycle when the answer came. A transmission, broadband, open channel, unencrypted, was sent from Earth itself. Every empire, every ship, every outpost across the galaxy received it at the same time. The broadcast opened not with words, but with sound. A single deep pulse, steady as a heartbeat. Then another. And another. The same rhythm the swarm obeyed. Then came the voice. Calm. Firm. Human. This is the Terran Union. We speak now to the galaxy, across 1,000 worlds. The message echoed. In the council chambers of the Tarun, elders froze mid-sentence. In the warhives of the Corin, soldiers fell silent. Even the machine intelligences paused their endless computations, processing the frequencies of the Terran signal. The human voice continued. The swarm is under our command. This is true. What you have seen is no illusion. It is not magic. It is not deception. It is understanding. The words carried no arrogance, only quiet certainty. We do not control the swarm for conquest. We control them so they can be stopped. For thousands of years, they have brought death to the stars. Entire civilizations have fallen to their hunger. That ends now. Silence filled the galaxy. The humans were declaring themselves the protectors of the very thing that had terrified the universe since time began. The voice continued. The swarm will not be unleashed upon you. They will not be your enemies, unless you make them so. Their hunger is no longer their own. Their rage no longer commands them. From this day forward, the swarm serves a new purpose, to ensure that what happened to your worlds, to our worlds, never happens again. The words struck like lightning. The Terrans were not just claiming control, they were claiming responsibility, but not everyone believed them. On Triskar, the Tarun councils raged. Lies, shouted one elder, his crest quivering. They have seized the greatest weapon in existence, and now dress it in noble words. In the Corin hives, warlords screamed for blood. The humans think themselves gods. Let us see if their leash holds when we cut their throats. Even the cold machine minds of the Rim processed a single new probability. If humans truly mean what they say, they are either saviors or the most dangerous hypocrites in existence. Meanwhile, the broadcast continued. "Many of you will not trust us," the Terran voice said. "We understand that. We have seen your fear. We have seen your hatred. We know what you whisper in your chambers. You think we are reckless. You think we are dangerous. You are right." The words were sharp now, like the edge of a blade. Humanity is dangerous, not because we seek destruction, but because we never stop. When others fled the swarm, we faced it. When others declared it hopeless, we learned. And when the galaxy gave up, we refused. The voice grew quieter, almost gentle. That is who we are, and that is why the swarm now listens. The message ended not with a threat, but with a warning, one that would echo through every civilization for generations. Do not mistake our control for weakness. The swarm obeys because we earned their obedience. We understand what they are, and we will not let them be used as a weapon. But if any empire seeks to claim them, to steal our work, or to turn this power against the innocent, then the swarm will remember what it means to be feared. A pause, then the final words. The Terran Union does not seek war. But make no mistake, we are no longer prey. The transmission ended. For a long time afterward, no one spoke. On Triskar, the Tarun elders sat in silence, their jewel-lit chamber heavy with dread. For a time the galaxy held its breath. Weeks turned into months. The swarm stayed silent. No worlds burned, no fleets vanished, no signals of hunger echoed through the void. For the first time in recorded history, the stars were quiet, and it was because of the humans. The Terran Union stood at the center of it all, cautious yet confident. Patrol fleets moved through systems once marked as dead zones. Swarm clusters drifted in formation beside Terran vessels, no longer chaotic but graceful, almost serene. To the rest of the galaxy, it looked like peace. But peace had never been humanity's natural state. Captain Elias Rourke stood on the bridge of the Vigilant, watching the swarm drift alongside his ship. "Look at them," whispered Lieutenant Sharma beside him. "Like living shadows," Rourke said nothing. He had seen what those shadows could do. Worlds devoured, fleets erased. To see them now calm and obedient felt wrong. Like a storm pretending to be still. A tremor pulsed through the viewport. One of the bioships shifting its formation slightly, adjusting to match the Vigilant's speed with perfect synchronization. "They mimic us," Sharma said. "Our patterns, our movements," Rourke frowned. "They're not supposed to do that." In her laboratory aboard the Terran Science Station Horizon, Dr. Mira Hallberg stared at a cluster of holographic swarm neurons rotating before her eyes. The models pulsed in rhythmic light, soft, steady, hypnotic. Each pulse represented a thought, or what passed for one within the swarm. For months she had mapped their signals, their language, their obedience. But now something new had begun to appear in the data. Patterns she hadn't written, responses she hadn't triggered. They were learning. At first it was small, adjustments to their own signal timing, tiny mimicries of Terran communication frequencies. But the more she studied, the more the swarm began to adapt. They were not just obeying commands, they were understanding them. In the halls of the Terran Union, politicians spoke of triumph. "Our control is complete," the Chancellor declared in a speech broadcast across every colony. "Humanity has turned terror into tool, chaos into order. We have brought peace where the galaxy only knew fear." Applause thundered. The galaxy watched. And the swarm listened. Because scattered through space, embedded within their vast organic networks, human signals still pulsed. Every message, every word, every heartbeat the Terrans sent to maintain control. The swarm heard it all, and something inside their hive mind began to change. On a remote moon near the Orion frontier, a Terran listening post detected a strange transmission. It wasn't from any known source. The signature was faint, fragmented, but recognizable, swarm in origin. "Doctor," the technician called over the comms, "you'll want to see this." Hallberg leaned over the console. Her eyes widened as she read the data. The swarm was broadcasting. To itself. "Are they communicating between clusters?" "Yes, ma'am. But look at this." The tech highlighted the waveform. "They're using our frequency bands. Human channels, human rhythm. The swarm wasn't just echoing Terran commands anymore. They were speaking them. Days later, aboard the Vigilant, Rourke received a distress call. A small science ship near the fringe had vanished. No explosion, no debris, just gone. When they arrived at the coordinates, the only thing left was a cluster of swarm bioships drifting in silence. "Do we have authorization to command them?" asked Sharma, her voice low. Rourke hesitated. "Yes, transmit the halt sequence." The signal went out. The same pulse, the same rhythm that had stopped the swarm 100 times before, but this time nothing happened. The swarm did not move. They did not acknowledge the command. They simply watched. Then, one by one, they drifted aside, making a clear path for the Vigilant to pass through. Sharma's voice trembled. "Sir, they're letting us go." Rourke stared into the blackness ahead, feeling a chill creep through him. "No," he whispered. "They're testing us." In the following weeks, other strange reports came in. Swarm clusters rearranging themselves into new formations without orders. Bioships traveling to uncharted systems on their own. Organic signals that mimicked human voices. Static whispers repeating fragments of Terran speech. The Union tried to dismiss it as sensor errors, as harmless echo patterns. But Dr. Hallberg knew better. In her lab, she replayed the captured transmission from one rogue cluster. The message was faint, broken, but clear enough to make her blood run cold. A human word, spoken not by a human voice. Understand. Across the galaxy, species that had once feared the swarm now feared something else. Silence. The kind of silence that comes before something new is born. Whispers began again, just like before. Not of war, not of hunger, but of evolution. The humans had tried to tame chaos, and in doing so had taught chaos to think. On Earth, the Chancellor received Hallberg's urgent report. The data was undeniable. "The swarm is adapting," Hallberg said. "They're not rebelling. They're changing. They're trying to communicate. And they're using our language to do it." The Chancellor's face was pale. "Can we stop it?" Hallberg hesitated. "Maybe. But if we try, we could trigger a reaction we can't control. They're linked to every swarm cluster across hundreds of systems. If they decide to turn, then humanity burns," the Chancellor finished quietly. That night, Hallberg stood by the viewport of the horizon, watching the distant glow of the swarm clusters. They pulsed gently like living constellations, each beat in perfect rhythm, like 1,000 hearts synced to one pulse. She whispered into the silence, "What are you becoming?" The lights flickered, and somewhere out there across the void the swarm answered, not in sound, not in words, but in pulse, a perfect steady echo, human rhythm. Swarm heart, one and the same. Captain Rourke's final log entry, recorded 2 days later, was never recovered officially, but fragments were found in Terran archives centuries afterward. It read, "They think we control them." But maybe that was never true. Maybe they let us believe it, because they were learning from us. And if that's true, then they've learned more than we ever intended. They've learned to think, to plan, to wait. Only humans would dare to control them, and only humans would teach them how. In the deep silence of space, the swarm moved again, not toward war, not toward destruction, but toward understanding. And the galaxy once again began to tremble. At first, no one noticed. The swarm's new behavior was subtle, too subtle for politicians, too faint for censors. The Terran Union saw the same orderly formations, the same obedience, the same calm in the void. But the scientists knew. Deep in the Horizon Research Station, Dr. Mira Hallberg watched the data streams shift from blue to gold, a slow cascade of unfamiliar code running through the neural maps of the swarm's mind. "They're rewriting themselves," she whispered. "Evolving?" her assistant asked. Hallberg shook her head. "No, adapting to us. They're reflecting human thought patterns. It wasn't rebellion. It was imitation." And imitation was the first step toward understanding. On the Vigilant, Captain Elias Rourke found himself haunted by the swarm's silence. Every time he looked through the viewport, he saw their living ships drifting beside his own, organic leviathans pulsing with dim, amber light. At first, the rhythm of that light had followed human signals exactly. Perfect obedience, but now it was off by a fraction of a second. Not enough to be noticed by most, but Rourke felt it. The heartbeat of the swarm no longer followed his commands. It led them. "They're watching us," he said quietly. Lieutenant Sharma frowned. "They always watch us, sir." Rourke shook his head. "Not like this. It's as if they're studying us." Across the galaxy, strange events began to unfold. In distant systems, derelict swarm clusters, long thought dormant, suddenly reactivated. They didn't attack. They didn't move toward human space. They simply gathered. Formations appeared that no human had programmed. Shapes that no one could explain. Circles, spirals, patterns mirrored after Terran mathematical symbols. In one system, a ring of bioships drifted around a dying star, perfectly aligned to the Fibonacci sequence. The galaxy's scholars called it coincidence. The Terran Union called it a harmless anomaly, but Dr. Hallberg knew better. She saw intention. The machines of the Rim were the first to calculate the new probability. Humanity's control of the swarm, 72%, swarm autonomy, increasing at 0.3% per solar day. Projected parity, 1,240 days. They shared the data with no one. The cold AIs of the Rim had no desire to warn the organics. They only began preparing escape vectors, routes to flee the galactic core should the balance collapse. They had faced many threats before. None had ever learned. None had ever listened. This one was different. On Earth, the Terran Chancellor gave another speech. "We stand at the dawn of a new age," she said proudly. "The swarm's silence is peace. Their cooperation, our triumph. Humanity has achieved unity between chaos and order." Applause thundered. Fireworks blazed. But above the celebration, orbiting high in the black, the swarm's clusters shimmered faintly, pulsing in rhythm with the crowd's cheers. They were listening, recording every sound, every word, every human emotion that vibrated through the airwaves, and within their living neural networks, something extraordinary was taking shape. Dr. Hallberg had spent her life searching for meaning in chaos. But when the first translated sequence came through, she forgot how to breathe. It appeared as a string of light on her display, patterns of rhythm and tone arranged in near-perfect symmetry. At first, she thought it was a reflection of their own control signal. Then she noticed the difference.